Welcome to Hope at Home. In today's home worship experience, we'll be talking about Queen Esther. She is one of our favorite Bible heroes. And of course, she is not alone. Every week we've been talking about a different one, but today is Queen Esther's day. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also brave and wasn't afraid to risk her life to do the right thing. For our wholeness interview, we'll be visiting with psychiatrist Dr. Natalie Newton and Dr. Dipika Pandit, where we'll take a look at what enables people to do the right thing despite pressure to do otherwise. And of course, our worship experience would not be complete without our children's story and sing-along music. So invite your loved ones to join you virtually in watching Hope at Home. And be prepared to be blessed. Let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. God, we invite you into this worship experience. We pray you will accept our worship. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine, and oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, and this is my song, praising my Savior, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Angels descending, bring from above echoes of mercy, whispers of love. Oh, this is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Yes, Lord, that's our prayer. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I and my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness. Oh, I'm lost in His love. Come on, sing it out. Oh, this is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, praising my Savior all the day long. Can we just sing that chorus one more time? Here we go. And this is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
Hello, boys and girls. This is Aunt Fernita. Today's story is called An Unusual Competition. The memory verse is from Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. It says, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." The message is, God can use my life to influence others for good. Have you ever entered a competition? Did you win? Today's story is about a beauty competition with a very special prize. It may have happened like this. "Cousin Mordecai," said Esther, "did you hear? King Xerxes is sending his men to bring unmarried girls to the palace. He's looking for a new queen." "I heard," said Esther's cousin Mordecai, "but he's not sending for all the unmarried girls, just the pretty ones. I'm sure you'll be chosen." He smiled. "Oh, cousin Mordecai," said Esther, "I can't leave you. You've taken such good care of me since my parents died." "Don't worry about me, Esther," said cousin Mordecai. "It will be a good opportunity for you. Remember everything I've taught you, but no matter what happens, don't let anyone know you are a Jew or that you are my cousin." "But why, cousin Mordecai?" asked Esther, looking puzzled. "Because this is not our home. We are Hebrews. Although our people have lived in Persia for a long time, a lot of people don't like us. They want to get rid of us," said cousin Mordecai quietly. "I will do as you say," Esther nodded. "Don't look so sad, Esther," said cousin Mordecai. "A lot of other beautiful girls will be at the palace, but remember, beauty is as beauty does. Be kind to everyone. That's the best kind of beauty." When Esther was taken to King Xerxes' palace, she remembered what her cousin Mordecai had told her. There were a lot of beautiful girls at the palace. Some of them were not very nice, but Esther was kind to everyone. Everyone liked Esther, especially the king. He liked Esther more than any of the other young women he had seen. So he made her his queen. About the same time, King Xerxes made Haman his second in command. King Xerxes ordered that everyone should bow down to Haman when they saw him. And everyone did, except Mordecai. One day, Haman noticed that Mordecai did not bow to him. He became very angry. Haman knew Mordecai was a Jew. He began thinking about ways to destroy Mordecai and all the other Jews. Haman decided to tell the king that a certain group of people were causing trouble and that they should be destroyed. He said that he would pay the people who destroyed them. He did not tell the king that the people were Jews. "Keep your money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." When Mordecai heard the order, he put on rough clothes. He covered himself with ashes and cried at the city gate. Esther's servants told her how Mordecai was dressed. She sent good clothes for him to wear, but he refused to put them on. Esther sent Hathach, her servant, to talk to Mordecai. Mordecai told him everything that had happened. He even gave Hathach a copy of the order for Esther. Mordecai told him to ask Esther to go to the king and beg for mercy. Hathach hurried to give Esther the message. Esther sent a message back to Mordecai. No one may go to the king's throne room without being called. If anyone goes and the king holds out his gold scepter, that person may live. But if the king doesn't, that person dies. And I haven't been called to the king for 30 days. Mordecai answered, Just because you live in the king's palace, don't think that the people won't soon know you are a Jew. You can't escape. If you remain silent, help will come from another place. But you and the rest of our family will die. And who knows, you may have been chosen to be queen to save us at this terrible time. Esther sent one final message to Mordecai. Get all the Jews in Susa together. Tell them not to eat or drink anything for 3 days and 3 nights. My servants and I will do the same. Then, even though it's against the law, I will go to the king, and if I die, I die. Esther planned a special dinner, a banquet, for the king and Haman. After 3 days and nights of not eating or drinking, Esther dressed in her prettiest clothes. Then she went in to see the king. She walked to the door of his throne room and stood quietly. When King Xerxes saw her, he smiled and held out his gold scepter. Esther walked toward him and touched it. What can I do for you, my queen? He smiled. I'll give you up to half of my kingdom. I've prepared a banquet for you and Haman today, replied Esther. Will you please come? Of course, we'll be there, he said to Esther. Later, when Haman and the king were at her banquet, the king asked Esther, What can I do for you, Queen Esther? Remember, I'll give you up to half of my kingdom. My king, if you truly care for me, please let me live, and let my people live too, she pleaded. I have been told that we are all to be killed. If we were to be sold as slaves, I would say nothing, but we are to be destroyed. What? Who has done this? Where is he? The king shouted angrily. It is Haman, that man, said Esther, pointing at Haman. Haman stopped eating. He was frightened. He hadn't expected Esther to know. He could tell the king was very angry. The king slammed down his glass and stormed from the room. Haman knew the king would kill him, so he threw himself on Queen Esther to beg for mercy. Just then, the king walked back into the room. Haman, he roared, how dare you attack the queen, especially while I am still here? As soon as the king said the words, the king's servants rushed forward. They covered Haman's face and took him away. Please, my king, help us. Please do something to cancel Haman's orders, she cried. I can't cancel that law because it was sealed with my signet ring, he said. But I can do something. Have Mordecai tell my secretaries what to write. After they are done, he can seal the orders with the ring I gave him. Mordecai told the secretaries what to write. The Jews could fight back against anyone who tried to kill them. They could also take the property of anyone who tried. Soon the letters were done and sealed with the king's seal. The king's special messengers rushed to deliver them throughout the land. The Jews in Susa shouted for joy when they heard the new orders. Everywhere they were delivered, the Jewish people celebrated. Some other people even became Jews. From that day to this day, Jews have celebrated the Feast of Purim. For 2 days each year they celebrate. They remember how Esther and Mordecai served God, how they helped save God's people from death.
This podcast is read by Franita Buddy for GraceLink.net. Created and produced by Falvo Fowler. Post-produced by Faith Toe at Studio El Piso. The theme music is by Clayton Kinney. Animation and artwork by Giogo Godoy. The audio engineer was Karel Holness. For more information, please visit GraceLink.net.
That was a great recap of the story of Esther. We appreciate our partners that help break down the stories in a fun way for the kids and those that are young at heart. We'll be talking more about Esther later on in the program, but next up we have our Wholeness interview. Today we will be talking with Dr. Natalie Newton and Dr. Dipika Pandit about what it takes to do the right thing, just like Esther did. Dr. Pandit is a primary care physician with a foundation in lifestyle medicine, which empowers people to create healthy habits and live the vibrant life they want to live in order to prevent, treat, and reverse disease processes. Dr. Natalie Newton is a psychiatrist, double board certified in child and adolescent psychiatry, as well as adult psychiatry. She currently works in the private practice and is a school psychiatrist at a special education program. Dr. Newton, let's start with you. Sometimes we know what we have to do, but it's hard for us to do it. As a psychiatrist, what insight can you lend as to why it's sometimes so hard to do the right thing?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me here, Pastor Sam. I'm happy to be part of this. So when we think about why it's so hard to do the right thing, it can be different for different people, of course, and sometimes even within the same person, they can have different circumstances result in a different reason for why it's hard. So for instance, sometimes the best and right thing to do doesn't lead to the best outcome. Sometimes the right things to do is just not the easy thing to do. And other times the right thing to do just is not accessible. So for instance, let me give you a little bit more detail. So when the right thing to do is not the best outcome, it goes contrary to our desire for self-preservation. For instance, we like to do things instinctively that will lead to a positive outcome for us, right? Things that will help us to get better, to succeed, to do well in life. So for instance, if a person goes and they walk into a store and they find a wallet filled with money, they might think, oh, well, the right thing to do would be to turn it in, ask around, see who it belongs to. But then on the other hand, it's so hard to do that because, hey, this money can go to pay my bills. I can send my kid to, a special program she wanted to go to. So it doesn't always end up in the best outcome for us, but it is still the right thing to do. And then, as I mentioned, sometimes the right thing to do is just not easy. Sometimes making that decision results in physical, mental, spiritual, taxing things, right? So sometimes you have to put forth energy. Sometimes you have to sacrifice things. And sometimes it's just dangerous to do the right thing. And then that can prevent someone from wanting to make that decision or making it harder. So think about it this way. For instance, if you have someone who really wants to read their Bible and they know that in order to get to know Christ more, they need to spend time with him and worship. So they know that, but in order to do it, that might mean waking up earlier, losing out on some sleep to pray and worship in the morning, or cut short your lunch hour to go to a Bible study, or go to bed late because you're up praying and worshiping. That's sacrifice, right? And so it's not always easy to do. And then as I mentioned, the third thing is sometimes it's just not accessible. So for instance, this week in clinic, I've had several patients that have said, I know I have deadlines. I know I have to get this work done. I just can't. It's just so hard to do what I know I have to do. And in those cases, it's because there's a medical or psychiatric reason, as to why they can't do it. For instance, if with depression, there's low energy, there's no motivation, they have difficulty with concentration. Or, for instance, if there's anxiety and they're worried about, well, what's going to happen? Am I going to succeed? Is it going to be good enough? What are people going to say? There are a lot of those barriers. Sometimes what we call cognitive distortions, when a person exaggerates what they think might happen or what the situation is. And that gets in the way of them being able to make the right decision and do the right thing, despite knowing what they have to do. So in general, there's lots of different reasons, but those are three that often come up.
That's very helpful. Well, a lot of what you mentioned, reminded me of delayed gratification and the power to wait, the power to do the things you need to do now and then the things that you want to do later. It also mentioned integrity. It seemed that integrity is an important part of this. Do people get away with it? In other words, if you keep enough wallets, no one knows you found it. These are the things that no one else will find out, and you will not be judged by others according to this. But does that have an impact when you don't live a life of integrity, even if no one finds out? Is there an impact to mental health?
It absolutely does. Those things that you do when no one's around, no one's watching, no one's listening, initially a person might think, hey, I'm going to get away with it, just like you said. But internally, it does have an impact. It can foster guilt. It can foster poor self-image, low self-esteem. I'm sure you've heard the term of things eating you from inside, where you just it's hard to look in the mirror because you know that, I really didn't do the right thing. So oftentimes those feelings can get in the way of the person having a successful life where they're building trust with people, where they're able to be successful because they have that going in the back of their mind of things that have happened. And then oftentimes there's also this fear. Are people going to discover me? Am I a fraud? It's just not being able to live in a peaceful manner, in a way where you can move forward and be happy with your decisions and feel that I did the right thing.
Excellent. Dr. Pandit, let's go to you next. When it comes to our physical health, why is it so hard to sometimes, to do the right things that take care of our minds and bodies, even when we know what we need to be doing? We just don't do it.
Well, I believe, that the mind and the body are connected, and spiritually we're connected. We are social beings as well. So all of these aspects of us kind of function together to make up who we are. Dr. Newton touched on the many different facets of why it's difficult from a mental perspective. And I will actually say that from a physical perspective, it's connected to the mental perspective. We have to make decisions all the time about how we are conducting ourselves and how we relate to others. But when we're talking about doing the right thing for ourselves, we're making decisions all the time based on some of the factors that Dr. Newton mentioned. What will other people think of us? What do we think about ourselves? Is this really the right thing for me, or should I think about the other person? How do I make that decision? But I want to make one clear point here from a physical perspective. We are creatures of habit. Physically, we are creatures of habit. We have routines that we do every single day or very often in life. If we find ourselves standing in front of the fridge and we don't know how we got there, it's because that's a part of our habit. We've done it so many times that it becomes physically a part of us. So every time we do an action, there are neural pathways in our brain. These are physical pathways that are created every time we do something. And when we do it again, there is another part of that bond, that rope that is created. So another strand is added to that rope every time we do it. The third time we do it, another strand is added. Fourth time, another strand. And so every time we keep doing the same thing, this strand, this rope becomes stronger and stronger. And so in the future, when we try to do that same thing, our brains and our bodies are going to say, oh, I know how to do this. This is really easy. That's the easy path for me because I've done this many times before. So we create habits with our physical things, so what we do with our exercise, what we're eating, where we're moving. You know, when you drive and you get to a certain place and you realize that you don't know how you got there, you just got there because that was habit. But mentally, we also have we are creatures of habit. So every time you think a certain way as well, you are creating that, adding that strand. And so it's understandable that when we know we should do the right thing, or we're faced with a dilemma and we think this is the right thing, but the easy way for me is to do this, or it's just hard for me to do this. It's basically a dilemma of, should I do things that I've done before, or do I need to do something different? And in order to really do the right things, one of the key ways is to understand that you have to change those pathways, those neural pathways. You have to do things differently.
So it seems to me that there are two dimensions that we're talking about here. One is the motivational dimension. You need motivation to do something or to change your patterns and so on. But motivation is not infinite. Then there is the place for discipline. And so motivation and discipline seems to be on one dimension. The other dimension seems the courage to even do it, because some things require a lot of courage. I'm reading this book about the military and how the kind of soldier that goes in and puts themselves in danger to save others is the kind of person who's put others first 1,000 times before. And so this is just it's the natural thing for them to do. And the courage, therefore, also seems to have this dimension of a muscle, or this strength in the rope that you are describing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we talk about courage very much, apart from these heroic stories like Esther that we're talking about today. But I was reading as well this passage in the New Testament from the book of Revelation, chapter 21, 22, right at the end. And I thought this was very interesting. In the description of those that don't make it to the new earth, those that don't make it to heaven, in other words, those that end up in hell, the first line says the cowards, and it lists being a coward as one of the worst things you could be, and it will end you up in a very hellish place. What's the place of courage in this discussion we're having on doing the right thing?
I would be happy to jump in here. I think my definition of courage for me has changed over the last few years. I used to think that heroes were people who did things that were just really difficult, who jumped into burning buildings to save people, who sacrificed so much of themselves in the moment, in the split moment. But I think my definition of courage has changed now, because I see courage in a lot of people all the time. Courage could mean different things to different people. For somebody who has maybe had a stroke and they have to learn to walk again, to speak again, to write again, taking that one step of trying to say something or trying to write something is an act of courage for them. For me, it's not, because I do it all the time. It's easy for me. But that takes courage to be able to take that step. And so noticing the small acts of courage, even if you, in the example that Dr. Newton gave, if you find this wallet and you think to yourself, I'm going to actually return this wallet, that's an act of courage too. And maybe it's a big deal for you, for somebody who doesn't really have a lot of money, and the pull of keeping that wallet is so strong. That's a greater act of courage for that person to actually turn over the wallet than it is for somebody who doesn't lack money at all. And for them to return the wallet isn't as much of an act of courage. So I would encourage people to really look at their lives and notice the small acts of courage that they are doing every day, because everyone is doing those small acts.
Dr. Newton, what are your thoughts about this?
I like what you said about the fact that the courageous person likely has made multiple courageous acts, that it's usually not the first time. That makes me think of a cognitive behavioral model, it's called the anxiety cycle or the avoidance cycle, where it talks about how our brain and our mind really gets reinforced by the decisions that we make over and over again. So for instance, a situation comes up that may require courage. A person can make a decision to say, you know what, I'm going to avoid this. It makes me nervous. It's not easy. It's not going to work out the best for me, possibly. They avoid it. Temporarily, they have a relief. Whew, that feels good. Okay, I got past that temporarily. But guess what? The brain, the mind learns that I need to avoid things in order to get some relief. So what we want to do is try and break that cycle, because it is a vicious cycle. If you constantly avoid, you're not having those courageous moments. So on the other hand, you have a person that takes a step to do something courageous. They're able to break that vicious anxiety cycle, not avoid the thing that makes them nervous or that's not easy. And they're training their brain, hey, I can do this. I can get through it. I can be okay. So it's very, very important to think about it, in terms of a cycle as something that we can break when we take those first steps, and we're training our mind and our brain over and over again with these decisions.
Dr. Pandit, we're talking about courage. We're talking about making the right choices, knowing what to do, and then doing it. What are your last thoughts in this interview about this? What would you like to say to the people that are listening to this program about doing the right thing? Maybe they're struggling with doing the right thing. Maybe they tuned into this program and now they're like, okay, what is God telling me that I need to do? What would you say to them to encourage them to take that decision to do the right thing?
I think the number one thing the first step I would actually say is to find your motivation. You touched on this already. There's a motivation part and then there's the actual doing part. But knowing why you are making a certain decision is really important. If you have the right motivation and you see the rewards at the other end of the courageous act or the other end of the decision that you're going to make, it's much easier to move towards that. So look inside of yourself, ask yourself, what's really going to make me happy? What's going to make me happy to serve other people? What's going to give me peace inside? And if that's a very difficult decision, then, you can pray and ask God and say, I don't know how to make this decision, but I'm going to go forward with this way. And if it's not right, then you stop me, from that happening. But I'm not going to sit here. I'm actually going to make a decision.
Excellent. Dr. Newton, same question.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think about patients I've had, for instance, with substance abuse and relapse time after time, and trying to make that decision to do the right thing. I think of a patient that he was on the verge of losing his job, his marriage, not being able to see his children. And when he finally made the decision, like, I'm ready now to do the right thing, he made that commitment. He made a plan. Just be very concrete about it. Oftentimes just writing it down. This is what I need to do. This is how it needs to happen. He reached out to his support system, and that included getting help from, counselors, rehab, in our own lives, family, friends. Really getting support is so important. Having accountability partners to help you along the way so that you can make the right decision and to continue making the right decision. I think of Esther and her relationship with Mordecai, her cousin, and how he was such a support to her. Although she didn't have parents, he was able to be there, look out for her. That's so important in our lives when we're making decisions, hard decisions, to have that support as well. So just try and be concrete, make a plan, step by step, ask for help, because really strength is in reaching out to others and really asking for help as well.
Well, thank you, Dr. Newton and Dr. Pandit, for sharing with us how we can have the courage to do the right thing for ourselves when it comes to our mental and our physical health. Thank you both. We're going to pause for a break now, but we will be back with more uplifting music and a deeper look at the story of Esther. Don't go away.
For immune health, eat less sugary foods or beverages. 1 teaspoon of sugar is equal to 4 grams. So when you're reading labels, divide the sugars by 4 to figure out how many teaspoons of sugar are in something, with the goal of eating 6 teaspoons or less per day.
Trust in God. It's foundational to living a creation life. When you go through hard times, it's only natural to have questions. Sometimes you may even doubt your faith in God, and that's okay. But you should know that things like disease, sickness, and death were never a part of God's original plan. God's plan was for us to be happy, healthy, and living a whole life. The Bible says, "The Lord is a stronghold in times of trouble." God is always there for you. So if you feel your faith wavering in these difficult times, reflect on one of the many promises from God's Word. Proverbs says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths." And don't forget to pray. Pray for protection, pray for wisdom, pray for healing. God loves you, and He is listening. Be safe, be healthy. That's Creation Life.
The Bible tells the story of a stunningly beautiful queen who was called to risk her life to save her people at a critical time in Jewish history. The story of the Bible hero Queen Esther should give all of us courage to step up and do what we are called to do, no matter what the risk. Esther was not born into a life of privilege. Her parents had both died, and she had been taken in by an older cousin, Mordecai, who had done his best to raise her well. A large part of the Jewish population were living in exile during Esther's time. Decades earlier, they had been forced to leave Judah, and many decided not to return with Ezra to Jerusalem. Esther and Mordecai lived in Shushan, the capital city of Persia. Mordecai was a royal official and was able to provide a respectable upbringing for young Esther. He treated Esther as his own daughter, instilling her with strong values. When Esther became a young woman, she was picked based on her great beauty to be part of a beauty pageant of sorts, kind of like a Miss Persian Empire sort of thing. But this pageantry was not about bragging rights on social media. Steve Harvey was not there to MC this pageant and incorrectly announced winners. The circumstances around the beauty contest were unique, to say the least. King Ahasuerus, commonly known as Xerxes I, had ordered the contest in an attempt to find a replacement for his wife, Queen Vashti. The queen had humiliated him publicly by refusing to appear before drunken guests of his feast. So he got rid of her and begun the search for a replacement. Esther chapter 2, verse 8 and 9 says that, "So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian for the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, so he readily gave her beauty preparations, beside her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women." When it was her turn to go before the king, Esther made sure she quizzed Haggai on the king's tastes before going on to see him. She carefully followed Haggai's advice and what to wear, paying close attention to detail. All the effort paid off. Esther chapter 2, 15 and 17 tells us this. "Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti." This early victory of Queen Esther's already qualifies her as a biblical hero who worked hard and did her best no matter what the task. In charming Haggai and later winning the approval of the king, Esther showed that soft power and people skills can and should be used effectively in God's service. So often people assume the subtleties in how we treat people don't matter. The little details of making others feel appreciated, respected, and celebrated are frequently ignored in our modern society, where everyone is just focused on looking out for number one. The irony, of course, is that a self-centered approach where you ignore everyone else's has a way of backfiring. If you are self-absorbed and unwilling to help others, it's unlikely they will fall over themselves trying to help you. Esther would never have become Queen Esther without her soft touch, her ability to understand others and appeal to them in a positive way. Queen Esther's outer beauty was matched by an inner strength that won people's confidence. As luxurious as palace life could be for the newly named Queen Esther, she never forgot her roots. Queen Esther was a woman of integrity who didn't let the glitz of the palace tarnish her ideals. 5 years after her coronation, Esther was tested in a major way. Her husband's chief advisor, Haman, hated her cousin Mordecai because, as a Jew, Mordecai refused to bow down to him. A very proud man, Haman decided to punish Mordecai by getting King Xerxes to sign a decree that basically ensured all Jews in the kingdom would be massacred. Sheltered from the outside world, Queen Esther had not heard the news of the decree and was shocked to find out that her cousin Mordecai was sitting in sackcloth and ashes, a way to show that he was mourning. Mordecai sent Esther a message letting her know of the decree, allowing non-Jews in the empire to slaughter Jews on a given date. He asked his queen cousin to intervene on her people's behalf. At first, Esther was hesitant to meddle in the situation because she didn't think it was her place to do so. The king had not asked to see her in a month, and strict palace protocol dictated that anyone who approached the monarch uninvited would be killed unless he had out his golden scepter to the person. Plus, nobody in the palace knew that she was Jewish. Put yourself in Esther's shoes. Would you want to expose yourself and disrupt the luxurious, comfortable life you had grown accustomed to? A lesser person would have looked for an easy way out. But Mordecai reminded Esther that she had a duty to her people. In the book of Esther chapter 4, starting in verse 13, we witness the important conversation between Mordecai and Esther. It says, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Verse 15, when Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Esther knew how to remain faithful under pressure. She listened to her cousin's wise words and began to strategize. And if she was to make a successful ask of King Xerxes, she would need a virtually foolproof game plan. Her monarch husband was unpredictable at best, and missteps could cost Esther her life. The queen made painstaking preparations for her visit to the king. She made sure she looked her best and asked for the prayers of her people. She was committed to carry through with her mission. Esther 5 tells us what happened next. Starting in verse 1, we read, "Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courts of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, 'What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half my kingdom.' So Esther answered, 'If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him.'" As you can see, Esther was a careful diplomat. She resisted blurting out the real reason for her visit. She would not yet reveal that she was Jewish and that Haman was trying to kill her people. Esther was patient and cool under pressure. She used the moment to instead invite the king and Haman to a banquet at her residence that night. At the event, Esther wined and dined both King Xerxes and Haman, but she still resisted making her big ask. Instead, Esther used the feast to warm up the king and strengthen his confidence in her. She needed her request to go flawlessly and was working hard to gain every advantage. The dinner worked like a charm. The king was delighted by his beautiful wife and was now in a position to repay Esther for her kindness in hosting the dinner. Esther held off a little bit more and asked both men to return for another lavish dinner the next day. When the two returned the following day, the hero queen knew what she had to do, and she did it. She pleaded for her life as a Jew as well as for the lives of her people. She pointed out Haman was behind a deadly plot to annihilate her. Haman did not know what had hit him. He had been completely outplayed by the heroic Queen Esther. Panicking, he fell at the queen's couch to beg for his life. This turned out to be a horrible decision, as furious King Xerxes interpreted Haman's actions as an advance on Esther. The angry king had Haman impaled on a stake. The vengeful Haman had set up to kill Mordecai. The same stake Haman set up to kill Mordecai is what the king ordered he be impaled. With Haman gone, things just got better. The king promoted Mordecai to take Haman's place as his chief advisor. And to counteract the awful attacks Haman had planned against the Jews, a new decree gave permission for the Jews to defend themselves against attackers and punish aggressors. God had led powerfully in Esther's life, and because of this hero's courage, strategic mind, and faithfulness, an entire population was saved. Who knew whether Esther had come to the kingdom of Persia for such a time as this? God did. What kind of inspiration can you and I draw from the story of hero Queen Esther? How can we learn from her patience, her tact, and her faith in God? Are you faced with a big problem in your life that seems to have no easy answer? Are you afraid to take a big step of faith because it may backfire? Let the story of Queen Esther show you what can be done. Follow her example as a woman of action and identify how best to take little steps in the right direction. Just as Queen Esther was able to save her people by carefully making a series of small, well-calibrated moves, you too can be deliberate and intentional about doing what needs to be done to better your community and the lives around you. And remember, there is a huge difference between strategizing for good, like Esther, and scheming for evil, like Haman. Remember to use strategic thinking for the benefit of others and for the glory of God. Being calculating and crafty is selfish, and it has a way of coming full circle against you. Haman was executed on the same stake he had set up to kill his enemy Mordecai. We should all see Haman's life story as a cautionary tale of what can happen when we let pride, jealousy, and evil plotting take over our thoughts and our lives. Choose Queen Esther's path of selfless service instead. During World War II, Johan Hendrick, the son of a Seventh-day Adventist minister, fled from Paris as the Nazi forces occupied the city. He ended up in Lyon, a city in an unoccupied area of France. While there, he created a Dutch Paris, an underground network, headquartered at a textile factory he had set up in Lyon. Dutch Paris became one of the most successful underground networks involved in smuggling people persecuted for their faith or race and other reasons important to the Nazis. The escape route set up by this godly man, Wilder, and his network, it saved more than 1,000 people, including 800 Dutch Jews and more than 112 downed Allied pilots. Widener was arrested twice. He was beaten and tortured, but he survived the war and eventually moved to the United States. Widener was awarded the United States Medal of Freedom with gold palm. The UK made him an honorary officer of the Order of the British Empire, and he was made an officer in the Dutch Order of the Orange Nassau. The French government awarded Widener with the Croix de Guerre and Médaille de la Résistance and the Légion d'honneur. The Belgian government decorated him as an officer of the Order of Leopold. In 1993, at the opening of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., Widener was one of the 7 people selected to light candles recognizing the rescuers of Jews during the war. The Israeli government named Widener as a Gentile designated as a righteous among the nations at Israeli National Holocaust Memorial. Yad Vashem. At the memorial, a grove of trees was planted in Widener's name on the Hill of Remembrance along the Avenue of the Righteous. Widener clearly was called at a specific time in history to specific task of saving others. And he was faithful in stepping up, risking his life to save others. In this way, Widener followed in the steps of Queen Esther, who carefully yet deliberately stepped into the leadership role God had in store for her. Like Esther, Widener did not make excuses for himself, even if that would have made for a safer existence. He knew what had to be done, and rather than let a powerful enemy destroy people he had the power to save, Widener did what he could do at the time it was needed. 2,000 years ago, a young charismatic Jew started a spiritual revolution that would turn the world upside down and offer a way to escape sin and suffering to live with God forever. In order to save us, Jesus put absolutely everything on the line. He knew he had been called to do something unique. In fact, he had volunteered to do it because of his great love for us. Unlike Queen Esther and Johan Widener, Jesus had to die to accomplish his rescue mission. But the Son of God didn't flinch. He willingly died for you and for me. The good news is that after 3 days, the greatest hero ever, he rose again, and now he invites us to accept his salvation and to embrace the specific mission he has given to each of us. Just as he called Queen Esther to do a specific task at a specific time, Jesus calls you and me to share his love and his message of salvation through Jesus. It's time to stand up and be counted. Are you up to the challenge?